Hello and welcome everyone. My name is John Heginbotham and I am the director of the Dartmouth Dance Ensemble and also an independent choreographer in New York City and a lecturer in the Department of Theater. And I'm so thrilled to be able to welcome our wonderful panelists to talk about the extremely important and fabulous and fun and heartbreakingly beautiful dance organism, Pilobolus, which is in the process of celebrating its 50th anniversary. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Renée Jaworski, who is a dancer, a choreographer of note, and the artistic director of Pilobolus, one of two artistic directors, along with Matt Kent. Hi, Renée.
Hi, John. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody. I'm so happy to see everybody these days.
And we also have Jeffrey Ruoff, who is a film historian and documentary filmmaker and writer. And he is on faculty at the Department of Film and Media Studies here at Dartmouth. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, John. Hi, Renée, Rebecca. Good to see everybody.
By the way, one of the films that Jeff has made is called Still Moving, which is a documentary about Pilobolus, which I think if you're watching this talk, you've just witnessed it. And Rebecca Stenn, my wonderful colleague, who I've known since 1989. We went to the Juilliard School together. And Rebecca is a dancer, a fabulous choreographer, the founding artistic director of Rebecca Stenn Company. And Rebecca has a long history with Pilobolus, with Momix, which is a company related to Pilobolus. And Rebecca, it's always so great to see you.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. Well, listen, I think to start us off, I'd like to ask each of you, maybe we'll start with Renée. How did Pilobolus come into your life? What was your first experience of Pilobolus?
Well, my very first experience was Sesame Street when I was little, to be honest with you. But as a dancer, as one who was thinking about dance, when I was, I guess I was a senior in college. You know, I, of course, studied them in my dance history class because, you know, I'm young enough but old enough. And so in studying, I was studying Pilobolus and Momix at the time. And a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, Erin Elliott, had auditioned for Momix. And she said, next time they audition, you should come audition if you like the work that you're seeing. And like, you know, because I was interested in the work when I started looking it up and seeing it and reading about Moses and reading about all of them and how they made work and where they came from. So I went, I auditioned, and I got a job with Momix. So I started dancing with Momix just after Rebecca left. So I missed her by the skin of my teeth, but met her and, you know, have become friends. So while I was on tour with Momix, I had an opportunity while I was in Italy to go with the crew who was working a Momix show. They were going up for the weekend to do a Pilobolus show. So they were like, why don't you come along? And so I jumped in the van. I helped them load the van with all their lighting equipment, jumped in the van and went with them, got a hotel, went to the show, and was blown away. It was the first time that I had seen them live. And I was just blown away because everything that I was seeing, it was like my imagination came to life in front of me. Everything that I had been reading about and learning about suddenly was in front of my face, and it like gripped me. And I thought, okay, there's something here. I'm interested. So skip forward about 3 years, I think. I left Momix to have my first child, well, my first and only child. And about, you know, when she was 3, I decided I was ready to start touring again. So I contacted Momix, who I had been working part-time for, and I said, I'm ready to tour full-time again if you have a spot open. And they didn't have a spot open. And then I read very quickly, or very soon after that, that Pilobolus was auditioning. So I went and I auditioned and I got the job. And little did I know that flash forward 21 years, I would be now, one of the first of hopefully many successors, artistic directors. So that's it. That's the story.
Renee, thank you so much. That is really beautiful. And also to hear the trajectory of dance and how our lives in dance can sort of change and evolve over time in really exciting ways. Congratulations to you on all of your great success.
Thank you.
And Rebecca, because Renee had mentioned this audition experience in which you sort of overlapped.
I don't know if you remember this, Renee, but I was at your audition.
I do not remember that at all.
I was one of the dancers helping out.
Okay, that makes sense.
And you came and everyone was blown away.
Oh.
I remember Robbie going, she's so beautiful. And that was that.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, it was a fun audition. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I took away that day was like, even if I didn't get the job, which I kind of knew I was going to get the job. Just because I did see I saw the reaction and we talked immediately afterwards. But I was thinking, even if nothing comes out of this, like that was a great day. Right. That was a great audition. It was a great,
always fun, those auditions.
Always fun. Yeah. And we try to keep that ethos, like as we're moving forward, like that's an important part of what we do. We approach our auditions very much like this is a workshop. Mm-hmm. We're going to get to know as many dancers as we can. We want as many dancers to get to know us and just have fun. Mm-hmm. That's the point of all of this, so that we can build each other up as artists, but also have fun.
That is a beautiful sentiment, because for those who may not sort of have experienced what it's like to audition for a dance company or a theater show, it can be really, really stressful. And to create sort of a benevolent atmosphere in which that can take place is a really special skill to be able to offer that. Rebecca, how did you first encounter Pilobolus?
Let's see. Well, when I was in high school, I was at Interlochen, which is a performing arts school, and I was in the dance program. And I remember the older girls, the girls I looked up to, talking about Pilobolus. And whether or not this was actually true, there was a rumor that sometimes they danced naked, and we were so blown away by this idea that I remember just going, I have to find out more about Pilobolus, whatever that is. And then then I went to Juilliard, and I remember being, I don't know, some summer program, and they were performing at the Beacon Theater, which is a crazy thought. It was this huge theater, and I went by myself and had that experience that Renee talked about, where I was blown away, and thought, okay, that's what I want to do. And then my senior year in college, Moses came and Cynthia to set Bonsai as a rep work. And which Bonsai is a crazy piece where you have to stand on people's shoulders and balance and everything. It was really out of anything I had ever done in my life. But I met them and thought, okay, that's that. This is what I'm going to do. And so I like Renee, I started dancing with Momix. I was hired as kind of an understudy. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was sort of learning stuff in the back, and then it's that, story. Somebody injured themselves on dress rehearsal. We were in Taiwan. I had to go on stage and kind of, after that got the job. Lisa Joby, she injured herself. It was terrible. But she took me under her wing and taught me everything in 3 minutes. And anyway, and then, so that was Momix. And then, so Pilobolus along the way decided to start a duet company. And that's what I did. I auditioned with Adam Battlestein, and we were able to do, they call it the gems of the rep. I mean, really the incredible duets and solos for quite a few years. I think it was almost 7 years. yeah, that's how it happened for me.
Yeah, it was called Pilobolus 2, TOO.
And Renee and Rebecca, does Pilobolus 2 continue to exist?
No, that, I think, when did that stop? It was like
a long time ago.
Yeah, either very early aughts.
Yeah.
I would say, like,
right. No, I had a baby in 2002, and that was when I left. And I don't know that it continued much past that.
Yeah, because I know like Emily did some stuff, Rebecca Darling did some stuff. So there were people who continued it with Adam, and I think Matt did some stuff too.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Under that name, but then eventually it stopped being called Pilobolus 2. And it was just Pilobolus residencies and shows.
Thank you. Again, a wonderful way. Individuals evolve throughout a dance career, and companies also undergo, tremendous changes sometimes. If they're lucky enough to last for such a wonderful period of time, like Pilobolus. And Jeff, what about you? How did you find Pilobolus?
Well, unlike Renee and Rebecca, John, I was not on any kind of trajectory that would have me intersecting with Pilobolus. I was a jock in high school and college. In that respect, like Jonathan and Moses and Michael and Robbie. And it was my partner who grew up dancing and watching dance performances who introduced me to Bill T. Jones and Twyla Tharp and Pilobolus. And so I seen you perform over a number of years. And then when I came to Dartmouth, it was clear why a company like Pilobolus could only come into being at a school like Dartmouth, a liberal arts college, where rather than an art school where a certain kind of naivete would turn out to be an asset rather than a deficit. So very unlike, Bennington or RISD or something like that. And as far as the documentary goes, when Pilobolus came here on their 40th anniversary, the story of how a bunch of jocks at an all-male school became an internationally renowned dance company seemed, presented an intriguing story to tell. And as much as the dance, I was really drawn to the ethos of the company, the collaborative, collective, utopian dimension of Pilobolus, which is very different, as I understand it, from most dance companies and lots of artistic activities.
Jeff, that's I love that you're finishing with that statement, because one of the things that is so fascinating about Pilobolus is this collaborative nature, both in the creation of the work and, at least in the early days, sort of the way people approached their lives. Rebecca, you said to me in a conversation about this that the collaborative nature sort of felt like maybe a lifestyle. It didn't stop at the creative process of making work. And, it should be noted, there are a million different ways for a dance company to manifest itself. Ballet companies with this one leader and a hierarchy, through the ranks, modern dance companies, which maybe sometimes, are an ensemble with multiple choreographers, sharing their work. But Pilobolus is quite unique in this way that the work from the origin of the company was created by 6 people in a room together. And I'm curious to know, Renee and Rebecca in particular, could you talk a little bit about how does that actually happen?
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. You kind of have to be there to see how it works, because I think people think we're crazy at first. And I bet you they thought that the founders were crazy too when they were in the room with them in the beginning, because it's just a lot of ideas kind of getting thrown out and tossed around, and until it feels like something clicks, you know? And then the room knows when something clicks and it has traction, and then everything starts moving in the same direction. And it's like you start to realize that you're not sure where the ideas are coming from anymore. You know, it's, you know, I don't remember who exactly said this, but somebody said the smartest person in the room is the room. Mm-hmm. And that's really how it works, like the best. Mm-hmm. It is not always that smooth, though. Mm. You know, there are arguments, there's disagreements about what is the right direction. Sometimes there's, you know, the friction develops into something that's really interesting, and sometimes it just makes it really hard. So I'm not going to say that it's always roses, but it's definitely, for me, it's a preferred way of working, because we always find something that you never would have thought of on your own. Yes. Regardless of how you get there, whether it was fun or not fun, or, you know, if you got into an argument or it just like worked and you like found that magic moment. Regardless, the end product is always something I'm proud of. Yeah. Because you're like, that's like something that like a bunch of people came together and like made. It's amazing. It's an amazing process to see how many brains can come up with something. Not one brain could come up with.
Is there ever, I don't know, a sort of sense of territorialism about ownership of movement itself or ideas themselves?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got an ego, so of course. Sometimes it gets worse than others, you know, like sometimes, and even in our history, it's 50 years, you know, and it's not always, the story isn't always a pretty one. So when it comes to ownership, and like, you know, when Mo left, there were, you know, certain things that he took with him and wanted to take with him, and still to this day, you know, make sure that he's being credited for. And we believe, well, Matt and I believe that we have to figure this out. Like, you know, when Allison also, when she departed the company, that was a big, you know, conversation about ownership. And still to this day, we're sussing it out, because Matt and I weren't involved in that situation. We weren't in the position we are in now. But yeah, ownership, you know, there's like, it gets tricky sometimes.
There's also, like what Renée, I appreciate what you're saying. And I also think it's interesting to think about it on the level of just in the creative process. Right. Like we used to joke, we used to have a running joke. Like you'd come up with a great move and you were super proud of this move. And the directors would go, hey, so-and-so, can you do Rebecca's move? And I'd be like, that's my move. I don't get to do that. You know what I mean? And somebody else, anyway. So I guess what it made me think is that in that sort of nitty gritty of the process, there is a shared commitment to making the piece. And that's what it's about. It doesn't become about, you're like, all right, take my move, do my move. I'm happy my move made it in, you know, the shared commitment. And so two things that came to mind when you were talking, Renée. One was, I've never worked harder in my life than in those rehearsals. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you would just work.
You'd work and you'd be so sore. We called it Pilobolus polio.
Yep, there you go. Pilobolus polio. So that was one thought I had, and there was a sense of like deep, I don't know, accomplishment and appreciation when you worked that hard. And then also those rehearsals required enormous generosity. I mean, you had to give and give and give and say, yeah, my move might be done by somebody else. Whatever, I'm joking about that, but that was a kind of running thing. But you had to approach it with, I just got to give.
Yeah.
And pardon me, Jeff, we're gonna get to hear from you in a moment here as well. I just have a follow-up question though for Rebecca and Renée. Again, about the idea of how a dance or theater piece is manifested in the Pilobolus style. Are there any rules walking into the room, for instance, a time limit on a piece, starting with a piece of music, how many choreographers, how many voices might be involved in the creation? Are rules like that, do they apply?
I don't think there are rules that are hard and fast, but we do set rules in the beginning of a creation. And we say, these are the rules for the game this time, you know? And sometimes we bring in outside collaborators. So that also dictates the rule of the game. Sometimes we want there to be more women voices in the room. That's a new thing. We can do that now because there are more women around. And so we'll kind of like set up those parameters, set up those constraints, but it's different every time. Sometimes we want to start with a piece of music. Sometimes we want to wait and just play with a lot of different kinds of music, or we'll start with a style of music and not choose a specific song or piece. Sometimes we want the music to be composed. So we'll bring a composer in at the very beginning and let the piece and the music build together. Sometimes we'll make the piece first, show it to a composer, and they'll put something completely different on it than what we were working with. And we'll be like, what? We didn't think that was going to work. And then we do it or we see it and we're like, oh yeah, no, you saw something we did not see at all. Like that works. You're actually bringing out a whole different layer that we didn't know existed in that work.
Rebecca, does this ring true for the time when you were in Pilobolus
Absolutely.
as well?
And I love the idea that each time you set work on a new piece, new parameters exist to help the piece come into being. And I totally agree. It wasn't ever anything. Well, I think that was the beauty of it, that there weren't any steadfast things. You know what I mean? We kept breaking rules that we made from the past piece. And then the work was always very alive, you know.
And Jeff, may I ask you, with your process of creating, and maybe specifically creating work that is documentary, does any of this collaborative nature apply?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, film is almost inherently a collaborative medium, like architecture or dance or other kinds, theater. Now, typically, I mean, certain kinds of filmmaking can be extremely hierarchical, and you know, it's comparatively rare to find partnerships like the Wachowski sisters or the Coen brothers, who have made 8 films with Frances McDormand, and or even the work of someone like Robert Altman or Jean-Luc Godard, who are more spontaneous and tend to work with the same people, film after film, cinematographers, actors, actresses, editors, film after film after film. So there is that type of, collective collaboration that is manifests itself in those works, which is differently from the top-down collaboration of a classic Hollywood piece. And then, there are, I mean, in terms of, I actually give this example to my students when I talk about shooting spontaneous, non-scripted footage, that there's a kind of choreography between the camera person and the sound person, because they need to be able to move around and give each other nonverbal cues about the size of the frame and where the microphone should be. And so people who are very good at that and know each other well, there's a lot of grace to the way in which they move around a space and figure out how to film it.
Jeff, talking about the sort of choreography of film, and I feel like what you're describing is really the physical action in the room of these people dealing with apparatuses. I wonder, is there also a potentially choreographic equivalent with editing?
Well, yes, actually, I mean, it's different. And I don't know for sure the different creative processes that go into the many different types of choreography the way that you three do. But, with documentaries that are not scripted, editors are sort of piecing together little, different pieces of a puzzle. It's very process oriented. It's a meditative activity. It's kind of like almost like dreaming, a gathering together of fragments and gestures and associative links among sequences that may be analogous to choreography.
Associative sequences. What I love about that is that it's such an organic way to talk about this. And I feel like if there is any company, a dance company on the planet that you could apply the word organic to, it is Pilobolus. I mean, it's in the name of the company itself, but in the creation of the work, I wonder just again about the process of making this work. Associative, sequences, threads. Renée, with the current group of people who are creating this work together, is this something that is consciously considered while choreography is being made?
The threads that Jeffrey is talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say, well, consciously, I would say maybe unconsciously, subconsciously. It's always there. We don't always talk about it, but it is always there. So that's I don't know how to answer that. I guess I just did. I think sometimes we bring it out into the open. Sometimes we say it flat out. But a lot of times we're trying to just let things bubble up from the subconscious, because movement is, I feel like it's such a dream state sometimes, and the stories that we end up with do come from the subconscious.
Well, and there was also that example that Rebecca gave of her gesture, which then sort of catches on and catches fire and becomes something different from what Rebecca maybe wanted, but gets incorporated into this larger thing.
Well, I would add maybe that it's a bit mysterious. Do you know how the process actually does unfold? Like, it doesn't necessarily feel linear to me always. And yet somehow over time a piece gets built, and it sometimes struck me as certain pieces were more mysterious than others, that they kind of found their way into being. Makes sense, particularly, but talking, what Renée was speaking about in terms of kind of it being a subconscious, not totally aware in a sort of literal way.
Are you able to speak about potentially a piece or two in which the outcome really was notably surprising from its beginnings?
Probably a lot of pieces, actually. I think one of the pieces that really stands out to me is one of our evening length show, Shadowland, because for us it was we went into it not real, like it was a new kind of way of making work, or a new medium, or a new way to express Pilobolus's medium, putting bodies together to create shapes and tell stories with those shapes. It's just that in this case, our bodies were not always on top of each other, and then the shapes became a shadow.
Because we're talking about a screen and a light source, and the dancers were sometimes, Shadowland, in shadow, in silhouette. Okay.
Right. in Shadowland, we have performances that happened, or like dance that happened without a screen and without shadow, and they also happen with the shadow, with the screen and the light, and then the bodies creating shapes that sometimes created characters that, and we very purposefully told a story from start to finish. However, just like any other Pilobolus piece, we weren't really 100% sure what that story was going to be until we were about halfway through the process. And then we were like, oh, this is a coming of age story. Okay. And then we started going in that direction. And then, you know, when we get to a certain other place, it starts to develop, you start to find new things. And then when it comes to an ending, you have to go, okay, how do we distill this? How do we now close this off and end this story? What is the end of this story? So we actually had like 3 different endings to Shadowland before we landed on the ending that we have now. And we realized that the first ending wasn't really an ending, so we changed it. And then that ending, over the course of like 2 or 3 years, it felt like the story had changed. Like the story didn't change, it had developed a little bit more. So the ending needed something a little different. So we changed it again. And then when we so it performed in Europe for 9 years before we brought it to the States.
Oh my God. Wow.
And then when we brought it to the States, we worked on it again and we said, wait, this is a different audience. So we need a new end. We need to change some things and we need to change the ending. So we changed the ending again. And that is the ending that we now know as our Shadowland ending. I could have never told you in the beginning of that process that we would allow that exploration to be that open for that long. But that is something that I'm really proud that we are able to do. We don't hold things so precious that as time changes, or as time moves on and audiences change and we change, performers change, therefore the organism needs to change. And each of our pieces are an organism. So it needs to grow, it needs to change and move with the dancers and the audience and everybody who's experiencing it, because that is the entire collaboration. You know, it doesn't end at the tip of the stage, it like expands into the audience. So as you know, we have to take that into account. And then we make changes. So that's sort of been the biggest surprise to me and the biggest lesson in my experience with Pilobolus.
Another piece that comes to mind for me, John, which goes way back to the beginning, and maybe Rebecca would have some things to say about it. I know Renée would, is Walk Linden, which I was initially going to mention because I don't know other dance companies that have as much fun on stage as Pilobolus does.
Well, that was
a prime example. And, you know, that's a piece that can have half a dozen performers or 20 performers, and including someone walking across in the backstage with no clothes on, right?
Yeah,
Jeff.
and talk about things changing based on the performers. Like sometimes the jokes don't land depending on who's performing it. So you got to make a little change to each cast, basically.
Wow.
We always say, like, if we can make each other laugh on stage, then then we know that the audience will laugh.
We crack each other up, we're good.
Yeah, exactly. So that was our goal every time we perform it, and it's what we make the goal for our new dancers too. Like, because we're still performing, and that piece is never going to go away. It's an amazing piece. Like, what a thought. Like, had anybody thought that they could go to a dance concert and laugh before that? I'm not sure that they did.
Well, I'm just going to interject for 1 second and say I myself have been in Walk Linden. I was that guy.
You were the one crossing in the back?
I was the naked guy in the back. Yes.
I'm so glad you were naked.
Yeah. It was, you know what? It was real scary for me to do it. And I was proud of myself for sort of stepping out and taking that risk.
Where was it?
It was at the Joyce Theater in 1993.
Nice.
Summer of 93. Yeah.
Great.
Wow.
Really fun.
And that's online, John?
It's gonna show up in Jeff's next.
Right. You can find it at the Department of Theater's webpage here at Dartmouth College in the faculty page. Yes. Listen, I'm getting a prompt here in the private chat. There is a very important question. We can keep the conversation quite fluid here, but there is a very important conversation that I would like to ask you all, and I'm very curious about this. Also because, well, like Rebecca, for instance, you have had this Pilobolus experience, and now you are part of the lineage here at Dartmouth. So the question for all of you is, how has Dartmouth College impacted Pilobolus? I mean, obviously the origin of Pilobolus is at Dartmouth, so it impacted it in a very substantial way. But
yeah,
maybe...
they hired Allison Chase.
right. As the dance composition teacher, yes?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm curious about this. How was Allison able to bring in these jocks? How did they find themselves in this dance composition course?
Well, Rebecca.
I mean, I bet there's a bunch of different stories because it's something that has a lot of lore about it at this point, but the story that I heard in any case is that they were all skiers and that they were looking to improve their athleticism, on the slopes and so took a dance class, which wasn't in anything any of them had, I think, done previously. I don't know. What did you hear, Renee?
So the story that I know is it does have skiing involved. So yes, Moses was a skier. He had hurt his leg very, very badly when he was, so he wasn't really able to ski anymore, and he was looking for a physical outlet. Robbie was actually a ski jumper. Jonathan was a fencer. Michael, I think Michael did lots of things, but the way I've been explained it by him is that he studied psychology and theater. So he had a sort of a different entrance and a different reason for taking the class. But I think they were all trying to fulfill a PE credit. And, and Allison was a gorgeous woman who had a class to offer that was physical and artistic and interesting. So that's kind of where that's the story I got.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll say one other thing that just kind of came into my mind about Allison, she's a magnificent teacher. And, she probably was able to sort of allow her students to conjure up, ways of thinking about movement that were really unusual, obviously.
Yeah, I think she said she knew pretty quickly that she wasn't going to teach them technique 5, 6, 7, 8 steps. Right. She saw that they were physically intelligent and said, I'm going to just teach them how to use the movement that they naturally do to create dance. Yeah, so she was brilliant. That was a brilliant approach. I'm not going to try and take a round peg and force it into a square hole. I'm going to let you kind of come to this with your natural talents and be expressive.
And I think, John, to your question, what Renee just described, like Allison's approach, that really could, and also Jeffrey, you alluded to this earlier, that really could only happen at a liberal arts college where, do you know what I mean? There aren't as many kind of maybe parameters or expectations or sort of, frames that we need to fit into. I think she was able to say, all right, everybody, let's kind of intellectually really dive in here, and think through this and take her students on that kind of a journey rather than having to fit into some sort of technical.
Right. Not like to approach something where there is no right or wrong answer. There might not even be an answer at all yet. Yeah. To be able to explore to the effect of we don't know what the answer is going to be because we've never seen this problem before.
Right. And
you know?
that can happen in a liberal arts space, not a conservatory, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a kind of creation myth by this point. And the one other part that I might add is that in 1971, Dartmouth was an all-male college, and a then 26-year-old woman dancer comes from UCLA to offer a course, and these young men sort of naturally gravitate towards the opportunity of taking a class that at a school that had 99.5% male teachers.
Right. And maybe for all of us as a group, I'm curious to know, we've talked about how Dartmouth has sort of influenced and created Pilobolus. On the other side of that, how do we think Pilobolus has sort of shaped sort of life and culture at Dartmouth over time? I will throw in one thing, which is to say that, Rebecca, you and I, as people who work with a current dance ensemble, the Dartmouth Dance Ensemble on campus, for many years that was run by Pepe and Vicky Dechiazza, who also reached out to the athletics community for cast members. So that tradition certainly has been kept alive over time. I wonder, do any of you have other thoughts about how you might see Pilobolus and its impact on Dartmouth these days?
I mean, John, I could just say an approach filled with fun and laughter and wanting to have fun and being inclusive to whoever wants to join it. I mean, I think some of those Pilobolian, principles still very much apply to the work that we do.
Oh, that is beautifully said. Yeah.
I know every time they call us to come and do something, it's always just a little different. Like one time we went and we performed with Body Vox and Momix, and we had like an evening of dance that showed the lineage of Pilobolus, or part of the lineage. And now this time we're coming, and especially now coming out of the pandemic, they called us and they were like, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know if we can do anything. But what would you do if we could do something? So then they were, very open to developing a program, a very full program too, I got to say, that could exist whether there's a pandemic going on or not. So this is another situation where it's like, okay, we have this problem. We don't know if there's an answer, but we'd like to explore it together and see what we come up with. And I think what we came up with for, in the last week of June is something that is creative. It's community. It builds community. It is about education, but holistic education, not, learn what I want you to learn education. So come and experience something and learn something about yourself kind of education. And it spans the ages too. Like we have stuff that's going to speak to young people and all the way to, older people who are coming and celebrating their 50th reunion.
So wonderful. And maybe, Renee, I'll just also say specifically when these performances are happening. Pilobolus will be in residence performing at the Hopkins Center for the Arts at Dartmouth College, June 24th through June 27th at the BEMA. Yeah. And starting this Friday, June 18th, the film Still Moving will be available online. And Jeffrey, I got to say, what a really cool film. I enjoyed watching it so much. And
me too.
It was really great. Yeah, thank you. And listen, I'll say we could talk forever. As my Freudian psychoanalyst, when I was seeing that person, often said to me, there's always more to talk about. There's always more to say, but our time is up. But I will say, is there anything that from any of you all that we haven't talked about or said that you feel like it might be important to say before we close up?
Just his phone number?
You know what? He retired.
Did you share it?
He retired. I sometimes think that he just told me he retired and then just to release me as a patient.
No, the one thing, I mean, this is out of order, but and not a period that I know much about, but how the original members who remained in the company transitioned out of performing themselves and became choreographers who worked with dancers. How you know, that must have been, I think, a kind of revolutionary moment in the history of the company.
Yeah, it was, and it was spurred on by Charles Reinhardt, the director or former director of the ADF, who's, you know, when they were talking about wanting not to be on the road, they were on the road so much for so long, and well, so long, it was like 7 years or something like that, but that's a long time, you know, when you're touring. So they wanted to start to, you know, pull away, and, you know, Martha had left and Moses was leaving. And so he said, you know, you can hire other people to do the things that you make or make with them. And they didn't know if that was going to work. Nobody knew if that was going to work. Like, would the special sauce of those because they were like brilliant performers. They were, you know, brilliant all around. Their minds, their bodies, everything was brilliant. So, you know, could another generation of dancers be that brilliant and grab the imaginations of the audience in the way that these guys did, and gals? That was the big question. And I mean, I think years later we realized, yeah, sure, because they not only, you know, they you know, it's not just about teaching a dance. It's not just about choreographing a dance. It's about creating a community and a lifestyle where everybody shares a similar philosophy, but is individual in the way that they execute. So everybody sort of can be themselves, but within this group. And y'all move in the same direction and magic happens. And so I think that it was a revolutionary thing for them. And I'm so glad it happened.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Renée Jaworski, Jeffrey Ruoff, Rebecca Stenn. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your experience with Pilobolus at the Hopkins Center for the Arts.
Looking forward to being there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to seeing you in person.
Yes.